So my name's Anne Halpin. I'm normally speaking about HLA or ABO related things. So this is a bit out of my comfort zone, and I feel I'm stepping into very big shoes, because if you haven't heard Mary Bocage speak before, I highly recommend you take that opportunity if it's given to you, because she's a very eloquent speaker, and I learn something every single time I have the opportunity to listen to her. So I am a living kidney donor. That's not been very long for me, so I haven't actually spoken in public about this very much. So you're getting not only a last-minute fill-in, but an unpolished presentation in every single possible way. So bear with me. As I said, I actually work in histocompatibility, and I've done that for a long time. And so I feel as a living donor, it's a strange, I would say almost like a battle between the feeling of my human feelings about being a donor and my logical science brain part of thinking about histocompatibility and compatibility and transplantation, or as has been described so well in the session before, thinking about epitope matching. So I didn't start off as, I was an anonymous kidney donor. I didn't start off that way. I was initially worked up to be a donor for a friend, and I actually didn't start off offering this for him, because I knew that we weren't compatible. That's another weird thing about being an HLA donor. You know all these things about yourself, and if your friend happens to be in your local transplant laboratory, you know whether or not you're compatible with them. So I didn't initially step up, and I guess I can say who it was, because I think lots of people already know that, and I've heard him talk about this too. So this is for Sean Delaney, who works in Canadian Blood Services, so I noticed on one of these slides already. So when I did notice that he was, so many people had stepped up for him, and but because he was a bit hard to match because of antibodies, and maybe also when you're around 50, a lot of your donors might be ruled out for medical reasons, unlike maybe your younger years. So I initially didn't, make that offer, but eventually I decided that I wanted to do that because I knew through our kidney paired exchange program I could be his donor. So I phoned the transplant living donor office and I said, "Oh, hi, I would like to be considered as a living donor for Sean Delaney, but we're virtual cross-match positive." And I hadn't yet said who I was, and this was very confusing to the recipient coordinator or the living donor coordinator, because why would a normal donor know this? But anyways, then I said, "Oh, it's Anne from the HLA lab," after they asked why I thought that I wasn't going to be compatible with them. So this was great. I started my workup, and that's a long process. That'd be a whole nother talk. But everything went well, and I was just finishing my last test, and I got a phone call from Sean, and he said, "Oh, you're off the hook," because he had a friend of a friend who had been thinking about being an anonymous donor and had heard about him and was worked up for him, and she was compatible. So of course they went ahead, and he did great. But it was through that process of watching him get his whole life back that I decided, I've already gone through this whole process. I know that I can do this. And his life was so just infinitely better post-transplantation that I decided to proceed as an anonymous donor. But I had a lot of conflicting feelings about this, because especially having watched, I don't know if you know anyone who's gone through this experience, and you see these lovely photos of them with their donor and all this, exchange of information and how everyone's doing. And I realized that as an anonymous donor, that would not be part of what would happen for me. And so I proceeded to send one of the strangest emails that I've ever sent in my life to a previous, someone who'd been our manager in the HLA lab a long time before, whose mother had had a kidney transplant. And so I sent him an email saying, "Oh, hi, we haven't talked for a long time, but does anyone in your family need an A kidney? Because I have one that I know I can give away." Anyway, that was, I don't think I'll send a stranger email than that in my life again. Anyway, there was not someone in his family who needed an A kidney. But even as I was sending that email, or thinking about sending it, which I thought about for a long time because it's a very strange email to send, I thought, gosh, this is silly, because I know that probably I'm not going to be a good HLA match to someone in his family. Maybe we'd be compatible, but we may not be well matched. And knowing this in my HLA part of my brain is one thing, but thinking about it as a human, thinking about doing something that takes a lot of thought to get to that point is a different thing. Anyway, I decided to proceed as an anonymous donor, and that sort of I started to get over this feeling, and I really did, and I still think of Sean as my donor partner, even though it's completely unrelated in every way, shape, and form. So it was it was, even despite this knowledge that I have of the benefits of being an anonymous donor, I really had to reconcile with that idea, which is why I asked the question to the other speaker about, the discussion of about kidney paired exchange, epitope matching versus deceased donor. So let's see here. I wrote down some thoughts just before this. So this is, I think there's a lot of opportunities here for advocacy and education around this. And I hope that, this really wonderful work that's begun already, looking at these working groups, or I forget the word used, it wasn't a discussion group, but I think it would be really interesting to actually expand that to the idea of living donation, because I think it's a different conversation though, because it's different, I guess barriers is the word that I would use. Because if you have a living donor, things proceed quite quickly. And it's pretty straightforward, and there's a human connection. And so those are all really important factors. And there's probably a lot more flexibility on the part of the donor. I'm very fortunate. I worked in a medical setting where I had flexibility, excellent support from the HLA lab, that I was able to still be an anonymous donor and have some timing around that. My timing ended up actually getting bumped. Like, I was scheduled for one day and the patient went in, had all my thing, I'm wearing my blood bank band, I'm ready to go in the morning. And then I got a phone call at 7:00 at night saying, actually, we have to cancel because the patient has something with their ECG is not normal, and we have to investigate. And it was a very strange feeling because I was really excited and prepared. And then I, email the lab and say, oh, "Just kidding, I'll be at work tomorrow." So that was a shift. And fortunately, I was able to reschedule. But those kinds of, I think scheduling is harder through through kidney paired exchange versus a directed donation. So that timing is important, but also, I guess, thinking from a recipient side, which I can't actually put myself into that perspective, but I would imagine that maybe you wouldn't want to wait longer. However, I mean, just having listened to a patient perspective, maybe that's not true. I shouldn't make that assumption, and I think maybe not every patient feels that way. But I think it would be an important question to ask. And I also think that, thinking about precision medicine around donation, and I didn't maybe do as much homework as you might even imagine. Thinking as a scientist, I did do some, reading about my risks as a donor. I did put a lot of faith in the nephrologists who are caring for me, but I did look for some Canadian context data of long-term outcomes for living donors. And we actually don't have a ton of Canadian data around that. And so I think that not only precision on the end of transplantation outcomes is needed, but perhaps precision around donation and the outcomes for living donors would be really valuable, because I think, and again, the patient perspective that we just heard, it maybe speaks to that a little bit too, because I think recipients worry about the well-being of their donors. Donors, especially maybe an anonymous donor, may think about their long-term well-being, and I think that would be an important opportunity to think about looking for precision around donation, not just transplant outcomes. So let's see, did I get through everything I want to say? Oh, I also think it came up earlier today with ABO. My blood group is A. My HLA is not great from a donor perspective, so I wasn't the best donor. But if I had been an ABO A2 donor, my program would have been very unhappy with me, because I would have insisted that my kidney go to an O or B person, and that would have meant being transplanted in very few centers across Canada. So I do think we need more ABO precision as well. B recipients, as was mentioned earlier, wait a lot longer. And so I think that there's a lot of opportunity in living donation, as well as deceased donation, to try to attack that inequity by doing more ABO incompatible transplant with or without enzyme treatment. I think ABO-A2 is very safe. We know this. And so that's just in short, that's kind of what I sort of thought I might stand up here and say. Again, it was not very polished. I have no slides. I had nothing really prepared. But I think that, and I'm still sort of parsing out, to be honest, that sort of conflict in my mind between my HLA brain and my human brain. I can say it was an amazing experience. If anyone in this audience is thinking about being a living donor, I wish I had a third kidney so I could do it again. It was awesome. It makes me happy every time I think about it. And I really don't have anything negative to say about that. I'm a female, so I've had lots of medical intervention and surgeries already. I had C-sections with my kids. So I knew that surgeries would be straightforward for me. And in fact, I only spent one night in the hospital and I was allowed to go home, which I think is a little unusual, but they sprung me early. And that was, I'm back to doing every single thing that I ever did before. In fact, I may end up being healthier because now I actually pay attention to my hydration and I try to drink more water, which I was terrible at before. So I think it was a really great experience, but I definitely would love to see more data around living donor outcomes. And I think more of a conversation about that, I guess the consideration of matching, switching even, like, is the right thing to do? Is it to bring up to living donor directed pairs to say, this is maybe a better way to have a better match for you for a better long-term outcome. I realize it's a very different conversation though than in a deceased donor setting, but I think it's a question worth answering or asking and answering. Anyway, that's all I have to say. I'm happy to answer any questions if anybody has any. And hope that this conversation and the excellent work that's happening in this area continues. So thanks.
And it maybe wasn't very polished, but it was very earnest. So thank you for sharing that. It's definitely moving. I think that, I was thinking of reflecting on your comments, and it must have been strange being an HLA expert, also being a kidney donor. And sort of thinking about how we define compatibility. So, at its basic level, we're talking about ABO and obviously cross-match compatibility. And now we're thinking about going beyond that, whether it be age or size or perhaps in this case, epitope matching. What are your thoughts on how we should be defining compatibility? And it sort of hinges the entire session together in terms of what's acceptable in terms of explaining what compatibility is.
Well, that's a pretty big question, but
yeah, sorry for that.
Yeah, no, that's okay. I think it's I think that the idea of compatibility and matching are such different terms, but I'm not sure we use them that way. And I don't know, I've never been in the room with a kidney transplant recipient when that conversation happens, so I don't know how, I imagine that not every nephrologist describes them in the same way, relative to each other. So we can be compatible without being well matched. And I think that's the whole point of this whole conversation. I do, and I think we're starting to shift with regard to ABO. I think we are starting to shift a little bit globally, and within Canada is quite conservative in this way as compared to other countries. I think that's really important, especially for ABO A2 donors. I knew my genotype was A10, so they didn't have to deal with that for me. But I can honestly say that if I was an A2, knowing what I know, because this is an area that I think about a lot, I would have been quite adamant that my kidney did not go to an A person. Right. I would have been quite adamant that it went to an O or a B person. And so that would have meant my being transplanted in another place in Canada that does that, which is really limited in number at this time, although that is expanding. And I think it's a conversation that is happening more. So I think overcoming, not using ABO as a sort of as an exclusion criteria, I think is important. And that would allow us to do better matching, not just for addressing the inequity of ABO, but also potentially the more we open donor pools, the more epitope matching we could do. So as a donor, though, it might have meant waiting more cycles. It might have meant a more inconvenience to me. Not that there's ever a super convenient time. In fact, I don't think anyone would piece together the information specifically, but transplant's a small field. So I've not really said the date that I did this, but with the rescheduled date, I submitted my thesis, I had my surgery, and then I did my defense while I was still on medical leave from donating. And I don't recommend that. That was a lot. Although I was kind of like medical sabbatical for preparing for my defense. But yeah, I think the timing is critical for many people. And so there may have to be more flexibility amongst employers, which already is a problem sometimes for barriers in financial compensation while you're off. And fortunately, I work in an institution that's part of the Living Donor Circle of Excellence. And if you're not familiar with that, it's a program where employers guarantee that their staff will receive their salary while they're on leave from their recovering from their donation. And that did make a difference to me. I think especially as an anonymous donor, that makes more of a difference. So, if you have an employer that's not willing to do that, or you're not flexible, then thinking about better matching probably means less predictability in when the transplant happens. And so there may be some different barriers for that. But I do think, using the terms compatibility and matching, they're not interchangeable terms. So maybe that's an important thing to think about. I don't know if I answered your question.
No, you did. Great questions. I mean, we've been trying to get compatible pairs in our KPD program to participate. And one of the key considerations is, in fact, the inefficiencies in our timing vis-a-vis people obviously wanting to not have a preemptive transplant, if that's a consideration, but also the certainty. And as you know, our KPD system only runs 4 times a year, and so it's very inefficient. Our hospital administrators, I don't know if there's any here in the room, we need to have prioritization of OR times and so forth. So if we're going to achieve some of the benefits of better matching, the system has to be much more efficient. There's a human cost, and that very genuinely came out in your comments in terms of waiting and so forth. We are out of time, but Anne, thank you so much. I'm sorry, this was a fantastic talk, and I'm sorry I monopolized the conversation, but I'm sure Anne will be willing to talk after this.
Yeah, thanks so much.